This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Dave McDonald.
I'm Nate Blyton.
I'm Sam Merciers.
And joining us this week is our very good friend Meerenai Shim. Meerenai is a Bay Area flutist, and she was one of the first ever guests that we had on SoundNotion. And so we're welcoming her back. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Meerenai.
Hi guys, thanks for having me on again.
So you have some cool projects coming up, right? What tell us about what you have going on.
Sure. So I have two premieres this month. One's on April 17th. It's the commission from Misurell-Mitchell for flute and percussion, and I'll be performing it on April 17th in Chicago.
Cool.
So that's pretty exciting. Because it's a pretty involved piece where I have to play some percussion. So I'm excited.
What kind of percussion are you playing?
Well, I mean, I'm playing flute most of the time.
Yeah.
But then she has me playing just like a brief thing of break drums and some gong and cymbal action.
Wow.
And my favorite part, the, what do you call it, mouth siren or whistle? It's not a regular whistle. It's like,
Samba
I guess
whistle?
what? I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's one of those like the original sirens that like cops in the early 1900s used.
Interesting.
I don't know.
Siren-y
Like on the
sound?
street.
Wow.
Yeah, I can play it. I have it if you want to hear it.
Sure. Yeah, hit it. Let's hear it.
Why didn't you say so?
Okay.
You always lead with the siren.
Interesting.
Okay. So this is the Acme siren.
Okay.
Okay.
Nice. So, tell us about this piece. You've recorded Janet Mitchell's music before. Your CD has a piece by her, right?
Yes.
So tell us about your relationship with her and how this piece came about.
Well, she was a lecturer at DePaul when I was doing my undergrad there a while ago, and I didn't know that she was such a cool composer until after I graduated. But then I heard Sometimes the City is Silent. She wrote that, sometime in 2011 or 2001, and then I was like, wow, my professors at school really are cool. I asked her to write this piece for me, and she is really great with poetry and reciting poetry, and she's great with words, and she's a fantastic vocal performer, I would say, in addition to be a fantastic composer and flutist. So I asked her to, incorporate words and maybe some singing, and she used some text from Luigi Russolo's The Art of Noise, which is from the Futurist Manifesto. It's sort of a little thing about how, like, the future of music is noise, and how when we run out of pretty sounds to make, we'll have to turn to more harsh sounds as music or noise or sound.
I like that.
So it was pretty cool.
Cool. So where is the space that you're playing in Chicago?
It's the Queen of Angels Church.
Oh, okay.
On Sunnyside. I don't know. I've never been there.
All right.
We'll find.
Cool. So how did you get connected with this venue in Chicago then?
Well, a couple composers have this off and on concert series called Chicago Soundings. It's led by George Flynn, who is now retired, I believe, but who also taught at DePaul University for a long time. And he and another composer, puts together these new music concerts in Chicago, and they asked Janice to put a piece on there, and so she called me.
Great. Cool. That's very exciting. And then you tell us about this other piece that you have. Is this the piece by Danny Felsenfeld that we talked to you about last year?
Yes.
Excellent.
That'll be on April 28th. in Berkeley.
And for people that did not watch episode 7 of SoundNotion, tell us a little bit about how this piece came about.
Yeah, this is a commission that I met Danny on Twitter, and then heard some of his music and commissioned a piece for flute, cello, and piano from him. And then we did a whole Kickstarter project to raise funds to pay for that commission. And so finally, more than a year later, it'll be premiered in Berkeley on April 28th.
That's very exciting. Tell us about that piece.
It's called To Committee, and it's a 3-movement work. And it's sort of, I think it's very sort of a personal work for Danny. I think he was just writing about the frustrations of submitting his work to committees.
Yeah.
To be evaluated by committees and such. So it's actually a really great piece, and I love the fact that it's such an energetic last movement, and there's nothing better than playing a flute piece that doesn't end in like soft nothings and ends with a bang. So
Cool.
I suppose there's probably a
It'll
lot
be
of
a nice
flute music that
programming.
ends like that, isn't there? A lot of soft nothings in flute music.
yes.
Woodwind music in general, I think, ends with a lot of song.
Yeah.
What's the name of the piece that Danny wrote for you, Meerenai?
It's called To Committee.
To Committee, as in it's going to the committee.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
excellent.
And what was the name of the other piece? I don't think we caught that, or I wasn't
Oh,
listening.
it's called The Art of Noise.
Ah, that's right. Cool.
Hey, Sam, could you
Yeah.
turn up your mic? You're very, very soft.
Okay. So, Meerenai, the big thing that led us to find you and have you on the show all those many weeks ago was that, Dave had been working on a Kickstarter project to fund. Had you already started your Kickstarter project, Dave?
Yeah, I'd submitted it to the thing.
So he was interested in that, and then he came across a story about you commissioning Danny through Kickstarter. And so that has started, at least among our circle of friends, a pretty intense interest in Kickstarter, and some people have been pretty successful at it. So the piece, just to make sure people understand, the piece that you've had completed now by New York composer Daniel Felsenfeld was funded through a Kickstarter project, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this week there's been a lot of talk about Kickstarter and how much money it's been able to raise for, quote, the arts, and what exactly it raises the money for, and how to categorize the projects that it gets the money for, and then articles that have put its total revenues up against the NEA. These are things that have been flying around, and we've covered some of them, and there's a new article that tries to put an even bigger perspective on the Kickstarter debate, I guess, the Kickstarter versus NEA.
The
Debate.
Kickstarter NEA thing all started at the end of February when an interview with one of the Kickstarter founders was published. In it, the Kickstarter guy said that they were going to be giving out more money to creative professionals this year than the NEA.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this, and they were, quite, I think, understandably quite proud of that. But he also says in the interview that he had kind of mixed feelings about it, because while he's proud of this product that he's created and this platform that allows people to crowdsource their funding, it's also, at the same time, you wish that it wasn't quite so easy to surpass the NEA. So there's the guy is clearly of two minds about the situation. And he also, in this interview, he's talking about the different kinds of projects that they fund. And this new article that we're talking about this week, a very long article in New Music Box by Ian David Moss, takes issue with the idea that Kickstarter could supplant the NEA, I suppose. I don't know if anybody was really suggesting that Kickstarter might finally just get rid of the NEA and we would only have Kickstarter or things like Kickstarter. But that seems to be the particular straw man that Ian David Moss is arguing against. And I take a lot of issue with a lot of the things that he says in this article. He's certainly got his supporting facts squared away and his statistics squared away, but I think he's missing a lot of key points about Kickstarter. He says that the NEA is a mission-centric agency, whereas the strings attached donations that take place on Kickstarter arguably have more in common with purchases of goods and services than with grants. And I think, well, yes, that's exactly what it's for. That's its virtue. Nobody's saying that these are donations, and in fact, Kickstarter specifically says these are not donations. This is not like public radio. People aren't buying $80 tote bags to support your unrelated thing.
Yeah, it's more of a CD presale.
It's more of a presale thing. It's more of selling goods and services. That's exactly what it is, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't think the arts should shy away from those more direct economic supports of people buying your stuff.
So do you think they're just so different that that's not a fair comparison to
what's so different?
I mean, that they play such different roles.
Right. I do. And I think the NEA and organizations like the NEA shouldn't be so heavily relied upon by people that are making art. I mean, this is kind of one of the reasons that orchestras are in such a tenuous position. We'll talk about orchestras a little bit later in the show, but they're in such a tenuous position because they're relying on these sources of funding that are drying up rather than selling tickets, or selling recordings, or finding some other novel business way of supporting the things that they do. The NEA is, as we've seen, subject to a lot of political bickering, especially when the government is not in a good place financially. It's an easy thing to cut. You know, it's a lot easier to cut the arts than it is to cut, say, Medicare. So, and I think that's the way it should be. I would never argue that the NEA is more important than Medicare. But for that reason specifically, we need to be okay with relying on actual for-profit business practices.
Yeah, it seems like he's starting with a cautionary tale at the beginning. I think probably one of the things that motivated this is to make sure we don't lose sight of the differences we've been talking about this whole time. Because, and I lost it now, I had it, but he says that pointing out something like Kickstarter is the kind of thing that a libertarian group would jump on as a way to say the government shouldn't be funding the arts because, look, private enterprise can take care of it. In the same way that a typical libertarian argument would be that we don't need, to protect the environment because there's a huge, well-funded special interest group called the Sierra Club that if you allow those lands to be free for purchase, they'll pool their money and they'll buy them and they'll protect them, which I don't think is necessarily the way it should work, but that's the kind of argument that a libertarian group would make. And he wants to make sure that we don't give over our ability or the arts ability to receive money from the government in favor of something like this.
And I don't think that the arts necessarily have to be nonprofit. There are certainly a lot of art that is nonprofit, and a lot of it's very good, but it doesn't have to be. He also complains in here that Kickstarter takes 8 to 10% cut. Well, of course they do. They're offering you a very valuable service that is definitely not free to give. There's this arrogance that all web tools should be free, and that's impractical. Right? Things cost money. Servers cost money. People to run them cost money. And things that are as complex as this are hard to build correctly and keep running. So, of course, they take a cut because they have a lot of expenses. And another thing that Ian David Moss points out is he says that Kickstarter doesn't have curation the way the NEA has curation, and that's one of the great benefits of the NEA is that it curates art. First of all, I would say that curation is less important today than it was when the NEA was founded, because there's such an abundance of artistic stuff with the web. Everybody has access to the things that they like, and we don't need somebody else to tell us what might be nice. Now, having said that, when there's a huge abundance of stuff, sometimes we do need some way to help find it, and maybe that's curation in a different sense. But of course Kickstarter has curation. It's just not curated by a committee of people that decide, you know. It's curated by the Kickstarter community. It's curated by people saying, we like that thing, we're going to pledge to that thing, we don't like this thing. And you can see when you go to Kickstarter, when you do a search, you come up with a lot of Kickstarters that didn't get funded. And that's, I think, one of the really nice things that Kickstarter does is they don't try to hide the unsuccessful Kickstarters. So I mean I was getting really worked up reading this Ian David Moss article. Maybe it was just me.
No, not just you.
So Meerenai, what you've done this a couple of different ways. Do you have any thoughts on this article?
I do remember reading the article, but
I mean, if you haven't read the article, that's fine. I mean, about Kickstarter versus more grant-like funding.
I think we need both, and they're really apples and oranges.
Yeah.
You can't say one's better than the other, or one's going to be replaced by the other. We need both.
So how are they different, though? If they're apples and oranges,
well, you've already outlined some of them yourself. I mean, anybody can have a Kickstarter project. Not anyone can even come close to applying for an NEA grant, or even apply for a grant that would have gotten money from an NEA grant. And anyone can raise money on Kickstarter. So
yeah,
in some ways it's a leveling of the playing field, I guess. But also Kickstarter, that grand total of money raised, are they actually talking about what I would consider art, or just general creativity? Because they're like some of the biggest money makers are, products.
right?
And I don't doubt the creativity and the seed money that's needed to make some of those really cool things come to life. But there's the NEA would never be giving money to a company that makes like iPhone accessories.
Right, and that's another part of it.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And I don't know how much of that they include in that $150 million number that they cited in February, but it is something that has been brought up a number of times, is that not all of the money that Kickstarter gives or the Kickstarter crowdsources is for the sorts of projects that even fall under the jurisdiction of the NEA. Things like product design, of course, not going to fall under the NEA, and certainly more pop geared things like graphic novels. The NEA is not going to support graphic novelists.
Or money for this tour that our band is going on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or money to produce this CD.
Yeah.
So certainly a lot of the sorts of things that Kickstarter funds are outside the purview of the National Endowment for the Arts. And I think like Meerenai says, we certainly need both kinds of funding. And I don't think it makes sense necessarily to think of them as being in competition, as some of these articles over the last couple of months have kind of portrayed them as being competing sources of funding. Just because you accept an NEA grant doesn't mean you can't also run a Kickstarter, even for the same project. So maybe it's not quite so valuable to think of them as being in competition with one another. One of the ideas that this brings up is musicians supporting themselves and not waiting for someone like the NEA to just hand them some money. Not that that's how the NEA works, because it's very hard to get an NEA grant. But it brings us to another article this week from The Economist. I don't know if we've ever had an Economist article on SoundNotion before. This might be the first, about new kinds of business models for classical music. And specifically citing a couple of different musicians who are trying some very new things about putting their music in different settings, and in general talking about private support, private patronage. What do you think, Sam?
There's nothing in this article that we kind of haven't talked about from one direction or the other on the show. I think I found this article, and what was interesting to me is that it's about classical music entrepreneurship, and it's in The Economist, which I thought was interesting, which means it's reaching a certain level of activity that even people who probably couldn't care less about classical music overall think it's something worth writing about. There are some interesting citations in here. A group called, in 2006 in San Francisco, a group called Classical Revolution was started, and it's sort of what we talked about a couple of weeks ago when Danny was on the show, actually, about Opera on Tap, where they have sort of franchises all over the country, and their goal is to get chamber music into different kinds of settings that are outside the concert hall, which we've talked about a lot. So this one is like Opera on Tap, except it's not opera, it's chamber music.
Called Classical Revolution.
Yeah, Classical Revolution. What did I say?
I don't remember.
Yeah, that's what you said.
And then there are some other people mentioned. A big person that's mentioned is Kimball Gallagher, and I was reading about this guy, and he is very much the entrepreneur, using exclusivity. Exclusivity as a selling point. Like, he's a pianist who will go and do private shows, like they mentioned Uma Thurman's apartment.
Interesting.
So I don't know if he's actually associated with Classical Revolution. I think they're
no.
Okay.
Yeah, he's not. This is just another example of someone who's kind of
want to be clear.
Turned himself and his piano playing into sort of a little cottage industry.
Playing concerts in people's private homes.
Yeah, concerts in private homes. And it sounds like it's sort of like a club, too. And then doing things that are also not, that certainly will advertise himself as a player, but don't seem to be necessarily geared towards getting money right in the here and now. Like having what he calls, wait a minute. No, I'm sorry. This is another guy, Jeffrey Siegel, has hosted these things called keyboard conversations, which I thought was interesting. Starts with a conversation about the music and then plays, and I
think it's the other way around. He talks a little bit, but I think most of what he's doing is talking after. Okay. The article talks about him using this format of a performance followed by an open conversation with the audience, and it's a very informal thing. And I don't know how necessarily this is funded. I don't know if the audience pays for a ticket into these people's private homes or exactly how that works. It seems like at least some of the time it's the host that pays for this person to come and then invites all of their friends. But it's interesting. It's reminiscent of like 18th, 19th century, or really not 19th, but 18th century like parlors and
salon.
Right.
Yeah, the salon.
And go ahead, Merenai.
Actually, I mean, these house concerts they've been around for a little while now, and I think people will host an artist into their home and then also advertise it like tickets. People would buy a ticket And that might, depending on the venue or the host, it could, mean like hors d'oeuvres and mingle with the artist and listen to a concert and hang out. It could be like a full-on meal. There's
Cool.
yeah, so it's not new. I bet if you do a really great job of cultivating your audience and potential hosts, I guess you could make, some money doing this.
Have you been to a house concert like this before, Mirenai?
Not one where you had to really pay. No, I mean just private parties where I've performed, but not.
Yeah, not a ticketed
They
event.
didn't charge the audience.
But you have performed it then, though, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, to me, this is an interesting idea in general because it's in one way a very old idea, which we just talked about, and interesting to me. I could go into East Lansing, where I currently live, on a weekend, and there will be, you see them advertised constantly, house parties where they advertise some local band, and I mean very local band,
Right. I mean,
who's from like 6 houses over, at that co-op.
yeah.
And so that kind of stuff is going on at that level, and it's interesting that classical musicians are doing the same.
Yeah, I grew up
Except,
playing a lot of shows like that, and that's what's interesting to me is seeing them being ticketed events and kind of thing like that. That's interesting.
But as far as the dynamic goes, to me it seems really similar. Like I'm gonna have a house party, and I'm gonna get this band I believe in. I'm gonna pay the band by giving them free beer instead of a check for $5,000 or whatever a classically trained pianist might get. And I'm sort of making a statement culturally about what I think's worth coming over and spending time listening to.
Well, I don't know if giving the players free beer is necessarily a good payment. Like, dude, you gotta give them something with which they can pay their rent, right?
Well, and that happens too. But I'm talking about at the lowest level. That's what's going on. And then
So
monetary.
I'm a little bit confused. I'm a little bit confused about the classical revolution sighting. While it's really revolutionary, and I've performed at Classical Revolution in San Francisco a few times, but I've made gas money. That's all I can say. That's about it.
Yeah.
I sold 1 CD and made some gas money on tips, but that's no way to make a living.
Well, see, and what you're talking about is the same thing that these guys that go play house parties in East Lansing would say. That's about what they get out of it.
Yeah.
So it's tough all over, whether you're playing, your original indie rock or you're playing classical music.
And I don't think it's unusual for musicians to have to support themselves by doing kind of tangentially related things, whether that's teaching lessons or writing reviews. I mean, people like Berlioz supported himself most of his career writing reviews. Mahler supported himself most of his career conducting.
Virgil Thompson supported himself writing really bad reviews.
Sure. I mean, and even Cecil Taylor washed dishes for most of his career in New York City. So I mean, I don't think this is unusual, but I feel like there should be some way of supporting people that are making great things by paying them to make great things. And I don't know if this is necessarily the most efficient way to do it. Maybe there's a way to do this thing better, but it seems like there's kind of they're kind of on the margin of being not very helpful.
What I heard about Classical Revolution, my friend Eli Bender lives up over in Toronto now, and when
you're in Michigan, it's over in Toronto.
Yeah,
it's
exactly
not
right.
up in Toronto.
Over east, and he was telling me about it, and just the format of it was what was most intriguing to me, and I'm curious about your perspective on this too, Mirenai. In this place, it was a coffee shop, and there were people talking, and it was really informal, and they had a big tip jar, and they'd put in a tip, and all the musicians while they were playing go, hey, hey, and just having it be a lot, or the format really common to like a bar band, but doing these like Haydn string quartets in that same format. And was that part of your experience in San Francisco as well, or something like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, San Francisco, because it started there, I mean, it's actually really packed.
Cool.
Every Monday night, you'll have a hard time finding a seat unless you get there early.
That's sweet.
And it's a bar and cafe, so there's, people with beers and, yeah, it's really a great vibe. I love going and I love playing there, but it's definitely not lucrative.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's approximately as lucrative as being the singer-songwriter at the same venue.
Right.
Yeah.
Not gonna
which is not
gonna get anywhere close to paying rent.
Right.
Much less making.
Well, some people put together shows where the goal is to try and mix different kinds of music to get different stakeholders listening to different kinds of music.
Yeah.
And that's something that
and maybe that's more of a long-term investment.
Yeah. Another New Music Box article this week by Colin Holter kind of talks about that. We've talked about this a little bit, and he's talking about a performance venue or something where a new music concert was scheduled, and we can't decide what exactly he's describing.
Yeah.
Eagles number 34 or Eagles Airy number 34. I don't even know what this is, but I'm assuming it's a performance space of some kind. And
it's a fraternal order. Eagles is so the Eagles are a fraternal order, and the Airy is like their space.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So anyway,
FOE.com.
He's talking about attending the show, which the example he uses from the night he went included a Schubert quartet, some free improv that he himself took place in, a DJ,
and a Zydeco
band that had access to a dance floor.
So I thought the Zydeco band was like next door in an unrelated thing.
Well, there were 4 stages, 4 rooms in the same space, and I think that was part of the idea.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what kind of noise isolation they've got, but I'm assuming if they can have, this is a particularly, the space would accommodate being able to hear the Schubert quartet while having a Zydeco band pound away where people can dance. Which I think is a great idea and is kind of related to what we've been talking about. But the thing that Colin Holter points out, and I've actually witnessed this before, is that there was no overlap between any of the areas. People who were into DJ music were standing there bobbing their heads next to the DJ. People who were into the Schubert quartet don't go see the Zydeco band, et cetera, et cetera. So while it sounds like a great idea to have all these different things mixing together to try and get people coming together, it didn't seem to work in practice. People just stuck with what they wanted or were comfortable with.
Have you had that experience before?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So I've go ahead.
Doing shows where I'm playing in a sort of a live tronica jam band, and the big thing that we do is we get the dance floor moving. Lots of sweaty hippies show up to the show, and they all like all the weird electronic noise we make on stage, but there's also a drum set going the whole time. So we try opening the show with like a weird live tronica sort of free jam, and nobody is engaged in the very, very slightest bit, even though the people up there playing are people they know, and it's music that we love making. They couldn't care less until we're done with that and the backbeat begins,
Right. I mean, I feel like we had a similar situation. Several of us were involved in a concert series in Lansing where we had these concerts at an art gallery where they have a lot of different kinds of concerts, and this art gallery has regulars that go to most of the things that are there, but they didn't come to our things most of the time.
Some of them did.
Some did, but I feel like we didn't really bring them into that kind of music. Like, I don't think they would say, "Oh yeah, now I'll go listen to some more of that."
Right.
And I still think they were by far the minority. Like, most of it was just people
students,
that were coming from other, weird art music venues.
Right.
So.
Right. So cross-pollinating is a tricky business.
Right. Very tricky. And we are hopefully going to talk some more about cross-pollination when we get Meerenai back.
Awesome.
Help.
Sorry, we lost you again.
Hi. Sorry.
That's all right. Are you on Wi-Fi?
Yeah. But
Yeah,
also
that's all right. It happens with Wi-Fi.
my Skype keeps on crashing.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no.
Well, that was a really quick return.
So, as Sam was just saying, cross-pollination is a tricky business. Have you had any experiences with this kind of concert, Meerenai, where there's a bunch of different kinds of music all going on together in the hopes that people who like one might come and then hear some other things that they might also like?
No.
All right.
Yeah,
So-
me neither.
Well, there you go.
I guess it's not maybe not. It's we always talk about these kinds of things though, like how cool is it to get this music outside of the concert hall, and in the hopes that it will speak to people that don't go to concert halls, and those people will
Reach
just
the masses.
will be converted. Yeah, it's like you're like a missionary. You're going to Argentina, where there are these people that haven't heard the word of Luciano Berio,
Reach these
and
children. Reach the kids.
and you need to convert them to whatever the second coming of whatever, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So
Arts
that's at least
education.
Colin Holter's experience. If you are watching or listening to this and you have experience with this working, please let us know. I would love to hear about someone's experience where they've taken this music outside the concert hall and there was a completely new audience that would never have heard or liked this kind of music and ended up making fans of this music for the first time. So if you've got that experience, send us a note. SoundNotion.tv /SN is our site for this show, and send us a note. We'd love to hear from you.
Mm-hmm.
So from
Matter of fact, go ahead and write up a manual on how to make it work.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
You gotta figure it
please,
out.
step-by-step instructions as simple as possible. Pictures are good. We need the pictures.
Some of us don't read too well.
Yes.
So this next story is kind of a Nate story.
I just got excited when I saw it.
Nate
that's
got
all.
Nate got very excited by this and spent a chunk of time this morning reading some magazines from the 70s.
Yeah.
September, October 1976 is the first episode.
So Nate, tell us about this story.
I mean,
Synapse magazine is back, sort of.
I was just excited to see stuff about Kraftwerk and Oberheim, and so it's Synapse was an old the electronic music magazine, and there's a couple magazines that are out there like that now, like Sound on Sound was around for a while, Electronic Musician, Computer Musician, and Keyboard was the one I always read. And I think I may even still have a subscription to that goes to my parents' house, and I need to work on that, but it was cool to see. So what's happened is they scanned in. There's an archive now of Synapse. It's high resolution scans, and they warned that they're high resolution scans, so you have to. It seems like they're warning us to not download it too frequently to ruin their bandwidth or something like that. And so they give a little bandwidth warning. But I was just reading this oldest art or issue that they have. An interview with a couple folks from Kraftwerk and with Tom Oberheim, and it's just
I read that, Nate, and it's funny that a lot of people these days, when you see the word Oberheim, you think, oh, that's the name of that keyboard sound in Reason. It's called Oberheim. No, this was the guy who actually built that thing.
well, so it's a whole company, it's a whole line of synthesizers made by this guy Oberheim, and
Oberheim.
I mean,
OB.
it's like Ray Kurzweil. Those
Right.
are his.
So, speaking of guys like that, very sadly, we lost one of them this week. Jim Marshall.
Marshall amps.
He of the Marshall amp.
Marshall
Yes.
stack.
The Marshall
And,
stack.
Really created a new, I think, a very influential, sound in new music. Like, ask Ken Ueno. When Ken Ueno talks about the catharsis of Jimi Hendrix, he's talking about the catharsis that he experienced thanks in part to these ginormous, super loud amps that Jim Marshall came up with, he and his company.
And if anybody's seen that video by The Darkness, you know that image of the wall of Marshall amps is a whole thing. It's a huge cultural item as well.
Right.
Oh, yeah. And it also started a new phase where if you want to make something super loud, you don't have to be Stockhausen to get the funding and the technicians to come and build the ginormous speakers. You can go down to the local music mart or whatever and buy yourself an incredibly loud box.
And who doesn't want an incredibly loud box?
That's right.
No one worth their salt, as far as I'm concerned.
That's right. So the next story that we're going to get into, completely unrelated, is something that we've kind of been avoiding for a while. It's been cooking for a long time. We kind of try to avoid most of these orchestra stories because they're basically all the same story. Groan, and also orchestras are boring. But the Louisville Orchestra looks like is finally gonna be gone for good. They've been performing it all this season due to labor dispute. The musicians keep proposing a plan that involves arbitration. The management keeps saying, no, we don't want to have arbitration except under our terms, and they keep threatening. Louisville Orchestra's been threatening for months now to hire non-union replacement musicians. And they have finally, once and for all, decided to do that. They're giving up on negotiations. They have said, negotiations haven't been happening for a long time. I think the last time the two sides actually got together was back in November of 2011. So, I mean, this hasn't been a situation that's gotten any better since at least last fall. And it's continued to get worse in a lot of ways. So, I mean, I don't know if there's really anything to say about this other than we feel for the musicians in Louisville, and we hope some good can come of this. Hopefully, this is something for the musicians to just give up on the Louisville Orchestra and start doing their own things. I'm sure most of them have already found other things to do outside Louisville. If there are enough left, maybe they can get together and work on putting together a new board and starting a new orchestra that has their interests in at heart. But it's a tough situation, and again, I don't know if there's a lot to say. Does anybody have anything to say about it?
I mean,
it'll be interesting to see what happens, because if they're planning on hiring replacement musicians, friend of the show Drew McManus, orchestra business specialist, calls it the short-sighted replacement orchestra scheme into motion.
Right.
And I think that's true. I wonder, how long it's going to take to fill out an orchestra, because it's just from a logistics point of view. If you're going to replace everybody enough to have a full orchestra on stage,
they say they're going to start in May and hope to have a full orchestra by September.
Yeah. We'll see, but and we'll also see how many high school and middle school people they have to put on second violin,
Right.
Which is another.
Exactly.
I can't remember where I read it, but that was one of the other points that was made in some of the writing about this. It's going to be tough to find the people and get them all there.
Yeah.
And so they're obviously going to be reducing how much they pay. So their ability to get musicians to move there just for this gig are going to be hindered by the lower salary, and one would hope an altruistic desire to not do it because you don't want to stomp on the orchestral musicians who are already there and been struggling for all this time.
There's no union musician that would go anywhere near there. There's
Right.
no professional orchestral musician who would play. They'll be lucky to get, yeah, like Sam said, high school kids.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to be dealing with amateurs. These are
Mhm.
essentially going to be amateur musicians that are getting paid for the very first time.
Yeah.
They better put the word civic in their title.
Say what?
They better put the word civic in their title.
Right.
Yeah.
Or community or something.
Yeah, throw
but-
this up, Dave, if you
Yeah,
can.
this. So I put this up. There's a silly web meme with Willy Wonka. Oh, you just replaced your professional orchestra with orchestra musicians with amateurs. I can't wait to hear the Bruckner. So it's just not gonna happen. They're not gonna play Bruckner. They're not gonna play anything worth hearing. So and honestly, an orchestra like this, after all of the animosity that they've been through with their organization this year, they're not going to be, this orchestra with the replacement musicians is not going to be here in 5 years. It's maybe not going to be here in 3 years. It's not possible. This can't last.
Yeah.
Right. And I really hope that they fail miserably at putting together an orchestra.
Yeah.
Just-
Good riddance to bad rubbish. I feel for the musicians, but
Exactly.
if the organization is incapable of, figuring out a way to make it work in the way it needs to work for a quote real orchestra, we're better off.
Yeah.
Right. And as bad as it's been between the orchestra and the musicians, I can't imagine a scenario in which they could reconcile and get back to any semblance of a functional relationship
And I
between the board and the musicians. Even if something were to happen and they were to accept arbitration and find a way to get the union and the board back together, I feel like they've gone beyond the point where this can be repaired.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt like Detroit was almost to that point.
Well-
I mean, and it still, I don't think is back to normal yet in Detroit. So
Right. Agreed.
Yeah, and I just wonder the
So,
morbid
another
curiosity
new music
with
box
which
article this
they would.
week, we're really pounding on the new music box, is by future friend of the show, Frankie J. O'Terry. I was interested in this one mainly because he addresses the idea of how instrumental music cannot portray a narrative structure that can then be manipulated, causing you to think, I wish this had happened, or thought that this was going to happen, or something like that. I don't know. I just thought it was very interesting to hear somebody agree with me so completely. But then he starts equating it to the way music that's contained within a very strict tonal context kind of functions that way. In that, you go away from the home key and you get back, and you feel it when you get back. But he calls it a spoiler alert because these pieces are called Symphony in A minor or Symphony in B flat major. So they're giving away the ending right at the end. I mean, giving away the ending right at the beginning.
I feel like that's kind of a trivial thing, though.
What do you think, Dave?
I mean, I feel like that's like just saying that this piece is going to end.
Anything.
I mean, you can't hear me?
That explains.
Oh, well, that's anyway. It's there's no I don't think spoiler in saying that the piece is going to end in a particular key.
Right.
That's I mean that if the piece didn't end in that key, then I don't think you would know that it was over. A symphony in A minor didn't end in A. That's like saying that that this show ends at 8 and therefore that's a spoiler.
Yeah, right.
So
It's 7:50, and we
Right.
haven't figured out who the killer
exactly.
is.
This is like watching your procedural and you're like, it's 7:50. I bet they solve the crime in the next 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Of course they're going to solve the crime in the next 10 minutes because the show's over. But who did it is the mystery. Like how you get to that point is the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's still plenty of things that you can't just even describe in the program notes this is something that he even mentions. Like, you could give a pretty detailed description of exactly what happens in a program note, and still, I feel, not give away the ending. I feel like the only way to give away the ending to a piece of music completely is to actually listen to the thing before you go, right? Like, that's the program note that describes it in detail is like the synopsis that you get from watching watching a movie review or something like that, where they kind of just tell you about what's going to happen, but they don't really tell you the ending.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like it's pretty hard to actually spoil a piece of music like that.
And I've always had trouble with even just like the justification of ending back in the same key. I've always had trouble hearing something like that.
Yeah.
Of the difference between ending in D or A or something like that.
I don't know. I mean, for longer pieces, sure.
Yeah.
It's really hard to remember back. I don't know if there's an explanation for that.
That's never been a concern for me.
Yeah.
The pick of the week.
It is time for the pick of the week. Our pick of the week this week is an interesting selection by, I think, Sam. Were you the one that found this?
I am. We've had too much pretty, accessible music on the show lately, and it's time to get all European and inscrutable and weird again.
Right. It's been too long, you weird Europeans.
That's right.
Let's hug it out.
We want stuff that only 4 people would show up to the concert if it were playing live.
Right.
Being played live.
Right.
Our ticket sales have been too high lately.
Yeah.
Right. And by saying that, we don't mean that this is bad music, because it's very good music. This is a
We're
piece.
just accepting the reality.
This is a piece by Marc Andre, and the so I believe the piece is just called Zoo, and it's for string trio, and it's a pretty strange. It's all special effects, extended techniques, kinds of things. Nate was really getting into some of the weird string effects when we were listening to this earlier. I don't know if there's a lot else I can describe about it without playing it. You want to just play a little clip of this piece? This is Zoo by Marc Andre. All right, so that's an excerpt from Zoo by Marc Andre. It's unfortunate that we can't play the whole thing, because I feel like we're really missing the thing about this work that makes it compelling is the way that all of these very on the surface very strange sounds are organized in time. There's this kind of direct build. I mean, there's very much a direction to this piece in the sense that there's this direct through line in like romantic music, where there's this infinite melody. There's almost this infinite melody that's made of these weird sounds instead of pitches in this. And so the music almost strikes me as romantic in a very, very weird way.
And we don't want to give away the ending, so
we won't give away the ending, but it does have this
E flat major.
It builds really nicely, and it's very there's a lot of restraint in it waits for the final thing, and again, I don't want to give it away, but it's a very cool piece, and it's not super long. It's less than 10 minutes.
Just
Yeah, okay.
it's
So about
9.5
it's about
minutes.
10 minutes. It's about 10 minutes.
Yeah, but it's
To me, it's amazing what a wonderful time we live in that this is a brand new piece, or last couple of years, that was 2008 or something like that, right?
The recording, I think, is 2010. I don't know when the piece was written.
Okay, so this is a new piece, and then we heard, you go and listen to something from Nonesuch or New Amsterdam, and it's new, and it sounds so different. Just such a rich listening environment out there, even when you exclude all the pop music stuff. There's stuff that's danceable all the way to stuff that is to me, like that piece is a pure headphones kind of listening experience,
right.
It's really, it makes me smile.
Yeah.
That those kinds of things are all going on at the same time.
Yeah. Kind of
And
thing that I
finding
would
an
love to hear
audience.
live sometime.
Yeah. I mean, seeing that happen would be pretty fun too, because you get to see a little bit of what they're doing with being so close to the bridge. Or there's tons of overpressure stuff later in the piece. That's why I was geeking out about the subharmonics and stuff. It's really cool.
That's one of Nate's favorite viola techniques.
Yeah.
It's always best to see it live.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it gives you an impression for what the musicians are thinking about when you watch them make these sounds, because it's I feel like the visual aspect of like watching people make music is a much bigger part of how we experience music than we would like to admit, and it's very easy to imagine how somebody looks playing a more standard technique,
Right.
like I think it's pretty easy, even on something like George Crumb. I think it's pretty easy to imagine what it looks like for the performers to be playing that, or even something more conventional, even Shostakovich. You can imagine what it looks like to play that, and it's much harder to imagine what it looks like to make these sounds, I think.
Yeah.
At least for me, as a non-string player.
Yeah.
Perhaps Nate is just picturing exactly what's going on.
And that's actually one thing that's fun about it to me, is a lot of the things would actually look pretty much the same of what they do in this. It's just a little bit different, a little slower, and like it shouldn't look like any other kind of exertion or anything. Something that's interesting to me about this piece and the sounds that happen in it, though, is in relationship to like classical revolution. It's like, take this into a coffee shop, and the relationship between some of the sounds that they make and the coffee grinders that are happening in the background. Like,
Sure.
you said that it might be that it would be headphone music, and
For me, I think it would be.
yeah.
While I agree that it would be great to see it live, I think it's interesting enough that I could forego that and sort of intentionally slide into the enclosed headphone space of the sound world it creates and be just as happy.
Yeah. So that's a very cool piece. You can check it out. It's all over the web. It's on iTunes and Amazon. Again, it's called Zoo. It actually has ellipses on either side of that, so it's ... zoo ... by Marc Andre for string trio. Despite the fact that in Amazon, clean this crap up, your metadata is all terrible.
Yes.
First of all, this piece is marked Strike Tiro, not Strike Trio. Second of all, you have the wrong group performing it. The group that you have performing it is like a saxophone, piano, and cello ensemble or something like that, and that's definitely not.
That would be pretty impressive. If they were
Right,
able
if they
to
were
sound
making
like
these
this.
sounds with a piano and a saxophone, then now I'm impressed.
Yeah.
So Amazon, clean your crap up. Meerenai, thank you so much for joining us this week. It was lovely to have you on again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to be on with you guys.
You
I'm
wanna?
really impressed
Go ahead.
and happy for you guys for having so many episodes.
Oh,
Great work.
thank you. You wanna one more time before you go remind everybody about these two premieres you have coming up and how they can find out about them?
Sure. April 17th in Chicago, 7:30 p.m. It's a free show at Queen of Angels Church, and you can find out more about it. I believe the website is chicagosoundings.wordpress.com.
Okay.
And then April 28th in Berkeley at Trinity Chamber Concerts at Trinity Chapel, I believe. I'll be premiering the Daniel Felsenfeld piece to committee.
Great. So thank you so much, and best of luck with those premieres. I hope a lot of people go check those out because I'm sure they're both going to be great pieces, and I am looking forward to hearing how they go.
Yeah. Do you have any further plugs? As it might be a while before we have you on the show again.
Oh, there's always projects happening, so
Yeah.
I may call you guys up again and see
Okay,
if you
Alright.
have
great.
me on.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
yeah,
hopefully it'll
definitely
be
do.
sooner than later, right?
Yeah, and of course you can always keep up with what Meerenai is doing on our website, Meerenai.com. And we'll have the link to that and all the other great things that we talked about this week on our website, soundnotion.tv/sn. There'll be links to all the stories there. If you'd like to share any thoughts or opinions on any of the stories that we talked about on the show today, you can do that there as well. You can also drop us a line on Twitter or Facebook. We're at SoundNotion on Twitter. We're also all individually on Twitter. You can subscribe to this show and all our shows in the iTunes store. So be sure to do that for free and catch every episode. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gullo, who hopefully will be with us next week, and video by Tyler Lepp. Next week, we're going to have composer Ricardo Lorenz on the show talking about premieres of his in New York and London coming up. You should definitely join us for that. It should be a great conversation. Again, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you back next week. R.I.P. Thomas Kincaid.